One foggy autumn morning, while the sun was still shy behind the clouds, Pierre was driving at high speed on a deserted road, winding through the mountains. The cool high winds slipped through the windows of his truck, filling the air with that familiar smell of damp earth and leaves. The mist covered everything, creating an unreal, almost mystical atmosphere. Pierre, a robust man in his 50s, accustomed to the solitude of the road, had not been affected by the repetitiveness of his journeys over the years. He knew monotony by heart. It was an integral part of his daily life. But on this foggy morning, a different feeling hung in the air. The road seemed longer, heavier, and his heart, often hardened by years of isolation, beat in a way he didn't understand. The engine of his truck roared, like an old familiar melody, echoing deep in the back of his mind. This sound, through hearing it day after day, had ended up transforming into a sort of soothing rhythm, as if he and the truck were now one and the same entity. But today, even that reassuring sound seemed almost too heavy. He stared through the windshield, his eyes lost in the mist that enveloped the road, as if the entire world was besieged by some kind of unfathomable void. Each village crossed, each magnificent landscape and each encounter seemed to move further and further away, leaving room for a void that could no longer be filled. He had seen thousands of faces, but none had marked his soul as he would have liked. Loneliness, although usual, weighed on him more than ever. As we approached a small mountain village, the mist suddenly cleared to reveal an astonishing scene.
On the side of the road, a solitary and frail silhouette stood out.
She stood there, motionless, with a calm, almost spiritual posture, and her thumb raised in silent request. Pierre instinctively slowed down, his gaze drawn to the unusual appearance of the person. She was a woman, but everything about her seemed detached from the everyday world. Dressed in simple clothing but of unaltered purity, she wore a white veil, like an apparition from another time. The contrast between the grey morning light and the dazzling white of his clothing seemed almost supernatural. His features, soft and serene, were marked by an obvious inner peace. An immutable calm emanated from her, a tranquility that struck Pierre in an inexplicable way. He found himself staring at her for a long time, as if trying to grasp something indefinable in her face, something he had never seen before. As he moved closer, he could make out the cross she wore around her neck, the gold of the object glinting faintly in the dull light. It was a simple cross, but its brilliance, despite the mist, seemed to capture the light of the day in an almost magical way. Pierre felt an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. Who was this woman who seemed so comfortable in such a cold and inhospitable environment? He rolled down the window of his truck, the sounds of the road suddenly becoming louder around him. His fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel as he prepared to speak to her. "Are you going far, ma'am?" he asked in a deep but curious voice. She slowly turned her head, her peaceful, deep gaze resting on him. When she spoke, her voice was soft but strikingly clear, as if each word carried a universal truth. "I'm going to the next town, brother. The road is long and I'm tired."
"Could you take me there?"
Pierre remained frozen for a few moments, as if the question itself paralyzed him. He had never taken passengers in his truck. He had always believed that the road was a private, almost sacred space, where solitude was the only company allowed. Yet something in her gaze, in the tranquility of her presence, pushed him to question this unspoken rule he had imposed on himself. Perhaps it was the softness of her features, or the serenity that emanated from her like a soothing perfume. He felt a strange sensation, a silent calling that seemed to tell him that this meeting was not a simple coincidence. He glanced inside his truck, which was far from clean and comfortable. There was no room for ceremonies, and the smell of old leather and metal had filled the space. But for some reason he couldn't explain, he couldn't refuse her help. "My truck is a little sparse, but there's room," he says, lowering the door to invite her in. She smiled softly, a simple but deep smile. Then, without another word, she settled down next to him, moving her body with infinite grace, as if each movement was the result of infinite patience, of a total absence of haste. Pierre couldn't take his eyes off her. Every gesture seemed perfectly controlled, every breath measured. She didn't seem rushed, not worried, but rather in perfect harmony with the world around her. It was as if she belonged to another realm, a space where time had no hold, where tension and anxiety did not exist. Silence naturally settled in the truck, a heavy but serene silence. Pierre kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead of him, his thoughts floating between the mist and the tranquility that seemed to envelop the cabin. But despite his attention on the road, he couldn't help but sneak glances at the nun. He didn't understand exactly why, but she gave off a calming presence, like a gentle breath softening the roughness of his own loneliness. He felt like he sensed something in her, an ancient wisdom and absolute calm that he had never encountered in anyone before. Everything about her seemed free of impatience, as if the world around her was suspended in a parallel space where time had no influence. She breathed slowly, with implacable serenity, with unwavering confidence in the flow of life. Pierre, although naturally reserved, felt an irrepressible need to break this silence. He found himself turning his head towards her, a sincere desire to know more. "Why are you traveling alone?" he finally asked, his voice a little hoarse after a long moment of immobility. She slowly turned her gaze towards him, and their eyes met briefly, a soft but deep glow lighting up in his. Her eyes were luminous, as if every look she made was imbued with decades of stories, experiences and wisdom accumulated through the ages. His response came like a quiet breeze that caresses the air, but which carried within it a truth that pierced through.
"I'm never alone."
"God is always with me," she replied, her voice deep and calm. There was something transcendent in his voice, something that didn't just respond, but seemed to nourish the soul. "And every encounter, every person I meet, is never a coincidence. Everything has a reason." The nun's words resonated in Pierre's head, in a way he couldn't explain. He was not a man of faith, at least not in the way she seemed to be. But he felt something in his words that resonated within him, something bigger than himself, larger than anything he had experienced. Maybe it was the softness of her voice, or the quiet look she gave him. The mist that shrouded the road seemed to dissipate little by little, as if his words themselves had the power to light the way. Pierre took a deep breath, but he didn't look away from the road, for fear of losing the flow of the conversation. He was fascinated, almost hypnotized, by this calm presence at his side. After a moment of silence, where the truck drove at a constant pace, Pierre felt strange, as if the heaviness of solitude that had weighed him down for so long was beginning to dissipate. He then decided to share part of his story, a step forward towards the openness that he felt growing within him. "I've been on the road for years.
It's my life.
But I've often wondered if it's really worth it," he says, his voice both tired and full of questions. "I went through hardships, war, loneliness. I found myself here on this road, driving this truck, surrounded by people, but always alone.
Always on the run.
I never found my place, and I feel like I left behind everything I could have been." The nun, whom he had now decided to call Sister Marie, listened to him in silence, her hands folded on her knees. She did not stare at him, but her eyes, with infinite attention, seemed to see beyond his words, as if each fragment of his soul were a book that she read without judgment. Pierre, usually reluctant to confide, felt strangely secure in her presence. He felt like a lost child searching for a compass in a world that seemed to have moved away from him. He did not have to explain further, because Sister Marie seemed to understand much more than he could express. She then spoke, her words falling with infinite sweetness, like pearls of wisdom that flowed slowly but surely into the hollow of her heart.
I understand your suffering, Pierre.
The road you have chosen is long and strewn with pitfalls, but it is not without meaning. There is a big difference between being alone and feeling alone. She paused, her eyes fixed on the hazy horizon. Many live in fear of solitude, but true solitude is that of the soul, when we move away from what is essential. You are not alone, Pierre, even if you feel abandoned. The road you take, with its trials, is also a path towards yourself. It is in the face of our own darkness that we discover the light. Pierre felt a shiver run down his spine. These words, although simple, seemed as deep as the ocean. He turned his head slightly towards her, surprised by the peace he perceived in her eyes. He felt a little lighter, as if the stones that had accumulated on his heart were starting to come off one by one. The nun continued, in a more intimate, gentler voice. You know, Pierre, sometimes the greatest freedom comes from the ability to forgive.
We live in a world where anger and pain seem to dominate, where fear lurks behind every street corner.
But peace only comes with acceptance, letting go, and above all, forgiveness. We must accept what we have lost, what we have done, and what we have neglected, to find the path to inner peace. Pierre, whose heart had often been heavy with resentment and regret, felt a strange warmth invade his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, like a soft, shy light peeking through a window that had been left closed for years. He lowered his head slightly, unable to mask an emotion he couldn't identify. His eyes blurred, but he quickly shook the thought away. It wasn't him, it wasn't the Pierre he knew, it wasn't the man who preferred to keep a facade of stoicism and indifference. But, for some reason he didn't understand, the company of this calm woman, and the words of wisdom she sowed in his heart, provoked something in him that he had never dared to feel before: vulnerability. He shook his head slightly and focused on the road, trying to refocus. The mist had cleared almost completely, and the first glimmers of a clearer day were peeking through the sky. The road became more winding as they approached a small village lost in the mountains, almost like a place just waiting to be discovered. The truck rolled slowly, its wheels barely crunching on the pavement that marked the end of their journey together. The silence that reigned in the cabin was no longer heavy, but charged with a sort of accepted calm, a calm that Pierre had never known in the company of another human being. Sister Marie broke the silence, her voice soft and light like an autumn breeze. Faith, Pierre, is not simply believing in something. It is learning to live with what is beyond us, to accept the invisible while being present in the moment. She spoke with such simplicity, but also such depth, that Pierre felt the reality of her words seep into his being, well beyond the simple words. I did not choose the monastic life out of obligation, but because I saw in faith a way to transcend human pain, a way to find light even in the thickest darkness. It is not an escape. It is a way of seeing the world differently. Pain is a companion that we must accept, but we have the power to choose how to integrate it into our lives. Pierre nodded slowly, the words echoing in his mind. He had always lived his life as a series of battles against pain, as a succession of days where suffering was simply to be endured, without understanding that this suffering could, in one way or another, guide him towards something greater, something brighter. He had never really considered this idea. That pain could be a bridge, a teaching hidden in the shadows. But Sister Marie's words made sense, and they awakened something in him, a spark that he had never perceived. As the village appeared in the distance, the roofs of the houses slowly disappearing into the rising mist, Pierre felt almost at ease in this conversation, as if it was no longer simply an exchange of words, but an exchange of souls. He turned his head towards Sister Marie, a glint of uncertainty in his eyes. "But what have you found in me to help me?" he asked, almost to himself, not really sure if he was speaking to her or to the deeper truth he held within him. His voice, soft but full of sincere questioning, betrayed a deep desire to understand what could have led him to accept this encounter, to view it as a moment of grace and light. Sister Marie smiled gently, but her smile was not that of a woman who has a ready answer. It was a smile full of kindness and understanding. "I'm not helping you, Pierre," she said calmly. "I'm simply a mirror. You have everything you need within you. You are a wandering soul searching for meaning, just like me. We are all searching for redemption, but sometimes all it takes is a small act of kindness, an unexpected encounter, to change direction." His words floated in the air, caressing Pierre like a light breath. She did not claim to offer him a miracle answer, but she had seen in him what he had forgotten to see, his own capacity to change, to get back up. The encounter had not been a simple encounter between two travelers. It had been a meeting of souls in search of light. Pierre suddenly felt humbled, almost moved. He didn't understand everything yet, he didn't even know where this conversation would take him, but something had changed inside him. He no longer felt frozen, no longer lost in an abyss of doubts. The truck slowed as they approached the small chapel at the top of the hill. It was a simple, almost modest place, but the sun was beginning to break through the horizon, illuminating the cross hanging from the top of the bell tower.
A feeling of peace invades the space.
Pierre stopped the truck, and for a moment he didn't move. The truck's engine continued to purr softly, but in that suspended moment, everything seemed in harmony. The chapel, the dissipating mist, and the calm presence of Sister Marie formed an almost unreal picture. Sister Marie turned her gaze towards him, looking at him not with pity, but with infinite kindness, a warmth that seemed to touch the depths of his soul.
Thank you for accompanying me, Pierre.
This trip was not only mine, but also yours, she said, her words leaving an indelible mark on Pierre's heart. He looked at her, almost not knowing what to say. The truth unfolded within him like a silent revelation. He had been that wandering traveler, but deep down he knew now that he had also been the guide, for her and for himself. He searched for the words, but he realized that what he felt was stronger than anything he could say. Then, in one simple gesture, he turned the key in the ignition, turning off the engine, and slowly turned towards her. Sister Marie, he said finally, his voice calmer and more open than he had ever imagined. Thank you.
I believe you are right.
Perhaps it is not the road that defines us, but what we choose to do with it. She reached out to him, not with the intention of offering him money, but to give him something more precious, something he didn't even know he was looking for. It was like a silent invitation, a promise of something beyond the material, a gesture of pure kindness, a blessing that seemed to encompass so much more than just his touch. Pierre looked at her for a moment, slightly disconcerted, his thoughts swirling in strange confusion. Yet, looking at her, he suddenly felt invaded by a gentle but deep energy, like a quiet flow that chased away the heaviness from his being. It was a sensation he had never known before, an immediate calming, a warmth that rose from deep within him and spread slowly, like a wave that spread through his bones, into his mind. He took her hand, hesitant at first, but when he touched it, a strange shiver ran through him. This was not the ordinary contact he had experienced with others. It was a pure sensation, a meeting of two souls, a kind of silent fusion. In that moment, he no longer felt just like a road-weary man, weighed down by his own inner struggles. He felt light, as if invisible chains he had worn for years had suddenly dissolved. He had never imagined that something as simple as human contact could free him like this. "Peace be with you, Pierre," she whispered, in a voice so soft that it seemed like a caress. These words echoed in his mind like a distant echo, but instead of disappearing, they remained there, deeply rooted in his heart. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he had been seen for who he truly was. A man who carried within him much more than his failures and his regrets, but also a capacity to welcome peace. Pierre nodded slowly, unable to answer immediately. He suddenly felt overwhelmed by a feeling he couldn't explain. He watched the nun's silhouette recede, walking with quiet confidence towards the chapel, as if she belonged there, as if the chapel itself welcomed her. He hesitated for a moment, a thought crossing his mind, a question he did not dare to formulate. Why not follow her? But he didn't do anything about it. Something inside him, a deep intuition, told him he didn't need it. What she had offered him was not a path to follow externally, but a path to take inside himself. It was a peace that came not from a place, but from a state of being, and he knew that now he carried it within him. It was no longer something he had to look for elsewhere, but something he could let grow within him, at his own pace. He sat in his truck for a few moments, his hands on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the landscape that slowly passed before him, without really seeing it. The sounds of the outside world, the cool wind blowing across the road, seemed distant, almost unreal. He was both here and elsewhere, immersed in deep thought. A simple meeting, a trip on the road, and yet, everything about him had changed. He thought back to everything he had experienced up to that moment, the tortuous paths he had taken, the trials that had shaped him. He had often sought peace, thinking it was found in great accomplishments, or in escaping to a place where he could finally find meaning. But what he had just experienced, what he had just felt, could not be compared to anything he had ever known. He had encountered peace in person, and he now understood that peace was not a goal to be achieved, but a constant presence, a possibility offered at every moment, if one was ready to accept it. He realized he didn't need to understand every detail of what had just happened. He didn't need to know how or why he felt this way. It was enough for him to know that something profoundly important had just slipped into him. He was no longer the man he had been when he got into that truck. He was different. Not completely changed, but a little more open, a little lighter, a little more ready to accept what life had to offer him. He had found a little corner of peace in his heart, a little haven where he could return when the world was too noisy around him. Pierre restarted his truck with calm determination. The engines roared again, but this time the noise seemed softer, almost comforting, like a traveling companion. He knew that this encounter, as brief and simple as it was, would remain engraved in his memory. But even more, he knew that he would never forget this feeling of peace that he now carried within him. He was no longer searching for something far away, but for something he had found in a fleeting moment, in the outstretched hand of a woman he had never known before that day. Pierre drove in silence, a feeling of calm floating around him, like an invisible but reassuring veil. No matter where the road took him, he now knew that peace was a faithful companion, found not in the goal of the destination, but in every moment of the road. And he was ready to follow her, in his own way.